I'm asking, should civil servants interfere with government policy? Unions are warning that the Home Secretary Priti Patel could face a mass walkout of civil servant staff as they protest against the government's plans to send asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. The Home Secretary had to issue a ministerial direction. That's a formal instruction from ministers to proceed with a spending proposal, despite objection from a permanent secretary, for civil servants to sign off on the Rwanda asylum plan. Now, it is thought that the Home Office staff opposed the policy on legal or ethical grounds and could now request transfers or leave the civil service altogether. So I'm asking, should civil servants interfere with government policy? Well, I'm joined now by Dave Penman. He's the General Secretary of the FDA Union. That stands for the First Division of Civil Servants. Is that the right Dave? So, Dave, why do you think that civil servants are taking a stand against this policy?
Well, firstly, they're not taking a stand. What happened was the permanent secretary, who's also the accounting officer, so he's responsible for the money that's spent. And what he said to the Home Secretary was that there wasn't evidence to say that actually this would be value for money. That it wasn't clear that it would deter people from crossing the channel. And therefore, when there is that doubt about it, he asks for this ministerial direction and says, I'm not convinced that the numbers add up, but if you want me to go ahead with it, I will, but you just need to take responsibility for that and take accountability for it. And that's what happened. So it wasn't about opposing the policy on that. Clearly, there are wider concerns. Just like in the country, this is quite a divisive policy. It will be divisive amongst civil servants as well. But civil servants also know that their job is to deliver the policy of the government of the day. So they either choose to do that or they have to leave because that's the nature of their job. They really don't get a choice to say no.
Yeah, but you know, sort of reading between the lines, I mean, take a stand or whatever, it sounds like some of them are threatening to leave in a sense if the policy is carried out. Is that where this is at?
Well, that's their only choice, because when you agree to become a civil servant, when you take that job, it's on the basis that you will serve the government of the day. You know that. And if you work in the Home Office, then you know you're going to be dealing with some of the most difficult policy areas in government. So none of this will come as a surprise to people when they become civil servants, that their job is to deliver government policy. But if someone feels that actually they can't do that, and there's an area of policy like this, which is quite a divisive one, as you can tell from the debate about it, then their only choice is to leave, because other than that, as a civil servant, they've got to implement it. So I think for some people, they may feel this is a step too far and that they can't support it and they don't want to do it. They may move elsewhere within the Home Office, another government department, or leave altogether.
Because that, to me, sounds like people saying taking a stand, actually, threatening to leave and then being prepared to leave. That does sound like taking a stand. I mean, for example, if I didn't want to do my job, then I would have to leave. It's not... But do you think, in your view, that civil servants should actually be involved in trying to sway that policy? Or, because in a way, it does sound like, I mean, for example, Border Force at one point said they wouldn't enforce the rules that Priti Patel had put in place. They didn't want to do what she was asking them to do. And again, they are servants of the public in a sense. So is it down to them to be doing that?
Well, they don't do that. They have their own professional code. So their job is to advise government. They give evidence-based advice to government, and that's in the Civil Service Code that says that's what they should do. Ministers, in the Ministerial Code, it says they should listen to that evidence-based advice, but it's up to ministers to make decisions. So, of course, civil servants are trying to influence policy because that's what they're paid to do. They're paid to look at the facts, give advice to ministers and say, we think this would work or that wouldn't work based on what the government wants to do. But this is an area of policy that clearly, is dividing the country around the nature of it. And if you're a civil servant, you agree to implement that policy. And your only choice, if you don't agree with that, is to leave, because you can't refuse to do it. So civil servants are not going to refuse to implement government policy. Most of them will do it. It's just that some, on the nature of this, something as divisive this, might choose to leave. And that's obviously the only choice they've got, because if they want to remain a civil servant, their job is to deliver government policy.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's Dave Penman. He's the General Secretary of the FDA Union. I'm also joined by Frank Ferretti, who's an author and academic. Frank, thank you for joining us. Do you think the government need to crack down on the civil service to stop this sort of unrest from happening continuously?
I think there's a very real problem, because, to be sure, civil servants have the right to give advice on any policy. That's absolutely within their remit. But what's been happening is that a lot of civil servants want to have their cake and eat it too, so that, for example, in the Home Office and elsewhere, there seems to be a reluctance to carry out certain policy. And maybe using the word sabotage is a little bit too strong, but there's a sense in which policies that the government has decided upon somehow aren't really implemented, or at least not implemented effectively. And what I'm really worried about is that if Priti Patel, for example, decides that this is the way we're going forward as far as illegal immigration is concerned, and she kind of puts forward a plan, there will be a lot of people within the civil service who will do their best to make sure that this policy will not be implemented effectively. And so I think there is a kind of a real difficulty here, because in many, many issues, the government finds it very, very difficult to actually get their policies successfully implemented, just because there is a kind of political opposition that's built up, which is under the surface. And it's not the case that when civil servants disagree with the government, they just simply leave and get another job. What happens is that they kind of stand back and in a very passive way sort of make sure that the policy doesn't get implemented in the right kind of a way.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was talking about. Dave seemed to think that they would just leave if they didn't like the idea of what they were doing. But I would put it to him that actually people can make it difficult for the job to get done. And it seems that they seem to be exerting a level of power. Do you think that perhaps they have a little bit too much power? And also, how do you feel about their protest and unrest over the Rwanda decision?
Well, what I'm really worried about is that there is a sense in which that the civil service, at least a section of the civil service, has become a law unto itself, so that they don't simply play the role of public servants. They themselves decide, which policies they like and which policies they don't like, and they act in accordance with that. So what we have is a very difficult situation where sooner or later the government will have to do something if it wants to act speedily and effectively. And certainly in the Home Office, the Foreign Office, for example, people dealing with education have found it almost impossible to push the button and expect the right kind of a result. So one of these days, we are going to need to have some strong ministers who will say, these are the policies that I've decided on. I want to see results by tomorrow at the latest, or the day after tomorrow, rather than just simply expect that this thing will just go carry on and drift away in the way it's the case at the moment.
Yeah. Well, listen, Frank, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Frank.